What's good, guys? So we all know the main benefits of no code, and that is you can build amazing, useful, and robust apps without needing to learn how to code, without being technical, without being a computer science PhD, without needing to learn programming language and debugging, etc., etc. You can basically go out and build the logic in order to help your customers, and that is kind of the point of software. That is really why we are all here. And no-code tools are amazing. They actually do what they promise. They get the job done. But still, there is another side of no-code that I rarely talked about on this channel. And so in today's video, I want to talk about 8 main caveats when it comes to no-code. And as somebody who comes from a software engineering background, I have a unique opportunity to compare software engineering, basically coding and building code by hand, to no-code tool. And so the purpose of this video is to help you anticipate the kind of issues you're going to be facing in the future, and so that you know what's coming, you know what you're dealing with, and that way you can handle them correctly and you can handle them properly. Now, the first point is the cost. Now, no matter which tool you pick, here we have FlutterFlow, we have Bubble, we have Adalo, pretty much any of the tool. The costs are going to be fairly similar, okay? So if we take a look at FlutterFlow, these are the costs on a monthly billing. You have annual billing. Here we have the Bubble structure right here, 25 a month, 115 a month, 475 a month. Here we have Adalo, 0, which is free, 36, 52, 160, etc., etc. Now, there are various things that you can do under the free plan. So yes, you can get started with the free plan, but most likely you will need to upgrade at one point or another. For instance, with Adalo, you want to use APIs, you will need to upgrade. You want to use something unique, you will need to upgrade. With FlutterFlow, if you want to have, at least more than 2 endpoints, you will need to upgrade. If you want to have some kind of integrations, you will need to upgrade. When it comes to Bubble, there's a lot of things that are in the so-called personal plan, which is 25 bucks a month. You will need to upgrade if you want things like APIs, like you want to expose APIs, you want to have custom domains, you want to have a production app, you will have to upgrade. And typically, if you're building an app and you want that app to be used by people, you won't be able to kind of use the free plan. 90% of the time, you will need to upgrade to the plan next to it. So typically, it's going to be anywhere from like maybe 15 bucks a month, 20, 25, 30 bucks a month, something like that. I would say the price you should be shooting at for a production app is at least 25 bucks a month. That is a realistic point. Whereas if I go out and I code an app myself and I build everything myself, I can get hosting on the service called DigitalOcean, which I actually use for some of my other projects, custom projects. I've actually been using the service for many, many years. And all I need to pay is like 4 bucks a month. Now, with 4 bucks a month, I'm not going to have the best performance. But if I come in here and I upgrade to something like 12 bucks a month, which is I believe what I'm paying right now, I can have a pretty decent app. And so with 12 bucks a month, if I code it myself, I have all the features, I have everything that I want. Of course, I have to go out and code it myself, but it's going to be definitely cheaper than a corresponding plan, which is going to be 25, 30 bucks a month. So cost is definitely a factor. You have to be aware of it. Cost is definitely a factor. Now, the solution to this is that you have to realize that cost is going to be higher, but you're getting a lot more in the package. You're getting a tool where you can build everything without, needing to go out and to build the stack, to worry about debugging, to worry about code, to worry about all this. So as far as I'm concerned, I am willing to pay more, 25 bucks a month for a no-code tool that just works. For me, that is very, very important. But for a lot of people, they might look at these prices and say, wow, that's a lot more expensive. But I'm here to tell you that if you want your app to work, you don't want to go and debug all weekends and, have a bug hunting you down for like a week and ruining your weekends like it typically happens with software engineers, then that is a really, really good trade-off in my view. The next thing you have to be aware of is the lock-in. Okay, so if I go out and let's say I go into Bubble and I build an app, here I have a few apps that I've built, and I go out and I build an app and I start improving it, it becomes a production app, it starts to get customers. I have more and more customers, I'm making money with this app, it's going to be fairly difficult to migrate that app elsewhere. On a platform like Bubble, I can't really take the code and either host it myself or move it to FlutterFlow or anything like that. Basically, I'm locked in. Of course, it's always possible to migrate it, but that would mean building the app from scratch on a new tool or on a custom service. So migration is really probably not the right word in this case, because you won't be able to migrate. You will have to build the app from scratch if you want to move to a different service. Same thing for a tool like Adalo here. Same thing for a tool like, Backendless, Thunkable, etc., etc. The only real exception is FlutterFlow, because I can essentially build a tool and I can export some of the code and I have a Flutter app. So that makes it a little bit easier. I can take that Flutter app and launch it elsewhere. But for the most part, you have to be cognizant. You have to be aware of lock-in, okay? Whereas if I go out and build the app myself, I'm not locked in anywhere, okay? If I build it on DigitalOcean, which is kind of like a hosting platform, I'm not locked in. I have the app, I can move it to a different server. I can host it on my own server in my bedroom if I wanted to, right? I am not locked in. So that is something you have to be aware of. And we're going to be talking about a lot of these other points that are going to be dealing with this main one. But what you have to realize, kind of the solution to this, is that you have to realize when you pick a tool, you need to understand that this is a tool you're going to be using. If you invest in a tool, if I'm building an app in Bubble, I have to understand that I'm going to be, that app is going to be on Bubble. Okay. My only solution is starting a new app, starting another project, starting something else, because, Bubble, a tool like Bubble, Adalo, all of these tools out there, for the most part proprietary, right? The app that I built is running on Bubble's own kind of runtime, right? It's a proprietary runtime. I don't have control over it. I can't just take the code and move it elsewhere. And so the more you invest in the app, as soon as the app starts to make money, as soon as you're getting like more and more clients, more customers, maybe you have recurring billing, maybe you have, more investment, you're building a team. You're building a team of Bubble engineers, you're building a team of Adalo engineers, you're building a team of Thunkable engineers. You have to understand that you won't be able to just move that code elsewhere. Okay, so that is very, very important. That is something you have to be aware at all times when you pick the tool, and make sure you pick the right tool. The next point I want to talk about is a similar point to the previous one. And that is outgrowing a tool, okay? It's not about picking the wrong tool, but it's about outgrowing a tool, because the app that you're building starts to have more features, it becomes more complex, it becomes more sophisticated. And so there comes a point where you no longer can maintain and kind of build out the app on the tool that you started to build it at. So let me give you an example. Here I am on Adalo. I have a lot of apps. I built, a ton of simple apps, and Adalo is great if you want to build a prototype. You want to build a quick app. You want to show it to a customer. You want to build it for yourself to make sure it works, to make sure it does what you want it to do before you go out and you invest time and money into building a real app. And Adalo is awesome for it. But if you're starting to build more complicated apps with Adalo, you're going to reach a point where it's going to be difficult. And so as an example, I built here a Tinder app. It kind of works. It kind of works for the most part. There's, some features that I just can't do in Adalo, but as a prototype, it's perfectly fine, right? As a prototype, Adalo is perfectly fine. And so the situation that that can happen with you, and I've seen this happen with other people, is that they use a tool like Adalo. They build prototypes. They build, more complex prototypes than I have here, a lot more complex than any of these apps that I built before, something like a real app. They build it out, they start using it. But as the features start to pile up, as they're starting to implement more and more features, they're starting to incorporate more and more features. Customers want more and more features. They realize they just can't build it in Adalo. They can build a prototype, but they can't build it in Adalo. So as an example, you want to build like a quick app. Like here I have a bunch of test apps. Let's see. So I have a quick test app. Obviously, in a real world scenario, you're going to be building a more complex app. Okay, this is just a quick example. And yeah, maybe you'll have, instead of 4 screens, you'll have 8 screens, and it has, this logic, that logic. It's doing all these things. If you want to migrate to something that has animation, something that has interesting things, something that has this, that, like maybe a Tinder style app or, Uber style app with, some animation here and there, maps and stuff like that, you may run into trouble with Adalo, right? Because it just doesn't support that kind of functionality. Maybe it doesn't have the Tinder functionality. Maybe it doesn't have the swipe functionality. And so you can build a prototype, but you won't be able to take the app to the next level. And there are 2 instances where this is important to mention. The first one is that you have a prototype or you have an app like version 1.0. Okay, so it's not a prototype, it's version 1.0. Maybe it's a dating app without the swipe functionality, right? It works, but you don't have those, snazzy animations that you have with like a real world production ready kind of Tinder app or a similar app to Tinder, right? Or maybe it's kind of like an Uber app, Uber Eats app, but it doesn't have some of the extra kind of those snazzy features that, these production apps have. And so you build an app, it's live, it's ready, but you can't take it to the next level because Adalo doesn't support it, or Bubble doesn't support it, or FlutterFlow doesn't support it, okay? So that's the first problem. The second problem is that if you're building prototypes all day, you've never built a production app. Basically, you're building prototypes, you're using Adalo for prototypes, and then one day you wake up and you're like, you know what, I want to build a real app, okay? And you realize you just can't do it because it doesn't support the features, okay? These are 2 slightly different scenarios, and that is the scenarios you're going to be dealing with if you either pick the wrong tool or you outgrow a tool. Basically, you pick Adalo to do prototypes and then you decide to build a full functioning app and you can't do it. So you pick the wrong tool. Or you pick Adalo and you build like kind of a dating app. It kind of works, but you can't take it to the next level. In this case, you outgrew a tool, okay? And so the solution to this problem, this is very, very common situation. It's especially common with people that have very little experience. They're not as experienced as some of the other people. And so the solution to this is that you have to know the tool inside out, okay? And that's going to take time, right? You can't just, sit down and memorize, try every single feature of the tool. You have to know the tool inside out. You have to know the limitations of the tool. You have to know what the tool can do, what the tool can't do. And so that you realize, okay, listen, I want to build a Tinder app or Uber Eats or, some app that's very, very similar, right? But you can't do it exactly like you want to do or how the client wants to do or how the user base wants the tool to work. You won't be able to do it. And that way you have to pick a new tool. And so it's important to understand the capabilities of the tool that you're dealing with. And obviously you guys are on my channel. You've taken the important step. You're seeing which tools, which apps you can build with which tools. And you're starting to think, oh, wait a second. I can use Bubble for a web app, but I can't use Bubble to build like a Tinder clone, or I can't use Bubble to build an Uber Eats app, okay? So that is very, very important. In my view, in my opinion, that is even more important than knowing every single feature of the tool, like knowing like, okay, how many components does Adalo have, or what some of the things that I can do with Bubble. It's knowing the big picture. And so you don't want to outgrow the tool. You don't want to pick the wrong tool. And so that is a very, very important point. The next caveat that few people talk about when it comes to no-code tool is that chances are you will have to write some code. I'm not saying you will have to write a lot of code. I'm not saying you'll have to build like a brand new app and write a ton of code. But chances are, even though it's no code, a lot of these tools are actually calling themselves low code. Okay, and so there's low code, there's no code, there's code. There's a lot of terms. It's very, very confusing. But I'm here to tell you that there will be situations where you'll have to write maybe a little bit of code, maybe a little bit more of, than a little bit, okay? A little bit more of code, depending on the kind of app that you're building. And so a perfect example is FlutterFlow. FlutterFlow is an amazing tool because you can take your Flutter project anywhere with you that you want. You can simply export it here. You can simply come in here and you have, developer menu. You can view all the generated Flutter code. But the thing about FlutterFlow is that it doesn't give you a lot of these built-in aggregate features or some of the other features that, for instance, you're going to have with like a tool with Bubble. And so with a tool like FlutterFlow, you will have to write custom functions. If you've seen my videos, you probably noticed that I'm writing a lot of custom functions. Or not a lot, but maybe in each video, perhaps in each video, I'm writing at least one custom functions. And they're fairly minor custom functions. Maybe I need to add like a number to a number. Maybe I need to add concatenate two strings or something like that. But here and there, I'm creating custom code. You've probably noticed that. But with a tool like Bubble, you are given a little bit more flexibility in terms of the things that you can get with aggregate data. So if you need to pull a lot of data and you need to do something on that data, sum it up, get an average, convert it into something else, some tools will give you more built-in functionality than others. But with Bubble, you have other problems, right? You're kind of boxed in. It's fairly difficult to create custom components, custom stuff, to have a certain widget behave a certain way. With FlutterFlow, on the other hand, that's what FlutterFlow is all about. You can easily create a custom widget, custom component, but you will have to write code. So regardless of which tool you pick, and regardless of the complexity of the app, if you're going above, if you want to, the way you have to think about it is that if your app is going to be fairly custom, it's going to have a lot of functionality that you want that maybe the tools do not support yet, or you are trying to create a copy an app that exists in the wild already, right? Exists in the market, and it's doing a lot of interesting things. Maybe a lot of drag and drop. Maybe you have a to-do list, and you can swipe, left and right. And this is a fairly new. Maybe it's a fairly new thing that you can do. It's a fairly new technique. It hasn't been implemented by the tools just yet. And so the way you want to think about it is that yes, for the most part, you will not have to write any code. These tools are designed to take the data, process it, and display it. And then you can do all kinds of logic on a specific row, on a specific record, on aggregate data, all of these things. That's what they're designed to do. But if you're going a little bit extra, you want to do AI, your artificial intelligence, you want to do machine learning, you want to do like Tinder swipe functionality, you want to do maybe a flip cards or some kind of other UI pattern that you've seen somewhere that's fairly new, or maybe even not that new, you won't be able to do it in some of these tools, because the tools haven't implemented that functionality just yet. Maybe they will in the future, but they haven't done it yet. And so the way to think about it is that out of the box, you can build any app that you want. You want that app to be a little bit more interesting, a little bit more interactive, a little bit more complex, a little bit more alluring to people, right? Something new and fresh. That's probably going to be a job for custom code. Now, the next point I want to talk about is the lack of full customization. Okay, and this is different than coding. This is even referring to how the app looks. I'm talking about templates. I'm talking about the UI. I'm talking about the widgets that you're given with, right? For instance, if I go into Bubble and I want to create like a brand new app, I have an app. Bubble gives me a template. I can start fresh, but still, it kind of tells me how it wants to be. In kind of a software land, in programming, we call that opinionated. When a tool is opinionated, it means it has opinions to how it wants you to use that tool and how that tool is going to behave. And so obviously no-code tools are fairly opinionated. Bubble has a certain way of doing it. FlutterFlow has a certain way of doing it. Adalo has a certain way of doing it. All of this are ways of simplifying how these tools behave. But in the process, they're essentially telling you how your app is going to look like. And if you want your app to look radically different, that's going to be either from hard to very hard to maybe even impossible, right? There's some situations where you can start an app and you can come in here and you have styles, right? So you can modify all of these styles. So you can spend an hour or two modifying these styles to kind of what you want, but you don't have access to like custom templates that you would have if you were building an app from scratch. If I go out and I build an app from scratch, I can get any kind of template that I want. I can build my own template. I can start with a bootstrap, which is a very, very popular kind of template There's also called Tailwind, which is another popular template. And so I can build an app that's highly customized, and I can make it look pretty much any way that I want. And so that is something you have to understand. Of course, that is the counterpoint of all of these tools, is that you're giving a tool and it's trying to simplify your life. But there's obviously the other side, is that it's simplifying it too much, where you don't have kind of this wide choice of how you can build the app that you want to build. Now, the solution to this point is that for the most part, this should not be a concern to you. You should internalize and you should realize that you really can go out and you cannot, create a fully custom app. You will have to, modify some of these style, standard settings and things like that. And that is absolutely fine, because when you're starting out, your goal is to make an app that helps people, that solves a problem they have or problems they may have. That is really what you're after. The UI stuff, you can worry about that later. Like if you look at FlutterFlow, it's all very similar. I'm sure if 100 people sit down and build a FlutterFlow app, they're going to look very similar. Almost, they're going to have the same theme for the most part. If you're not going to go on and create your own theme with your own font, with your own layout, if 100 people create a FlutterFlow app without modifying the theme, we're going to have the same looking app. But that is fine, because our apps are going to do different things. So you should not think about the fact that you can't customize it how you want. You should think about, is this app solving a problem that the user have? Because a lot of people, they're trying to become perfectionists, and that is the last thing that you want to do, because you want to go out and you want to just build an app that does something. It doesn't matter if it looks like if everybody knows it's a Flutter app, or if everybody knows it's a Bubble app, right? Because if you're not modifying themes, people will know. If people know these tools, they will know which tool was used to build this app, and that is absolutely fine. And so just realize that by using these tools, you're kind of boxing yourself in to a certain extent. You have a little bit of kind of a leeway, so to speak, but you're still boxing yourself in. But do realize that you should be using this to your advantage, and instead of messing around with the UI and themes and all that, go out and build an app that works and helps people. The next point I want to talk about is that if you're using no-code tools, you have to understand the security implications. Okay, so a perfect example is a tool like Bubble. Here I have a site, and Bubble has an internal database and has an internal data store. So here I have my data types, here I have my app data, and this is stored inside Bubble as part of the runtime. Okay, this is not a third party. This is not developed by somebody else. This is not hosted somewhere else. This is actually built by Bubble. And so you have to realize that if there is some kind of a security flaw, there's some kind of a security exploit, your data is going to be exposed. Your data is going to be exposed, and so will the data of all of these other apps that are, on Bubble, if they're in the same data center, or, if they're similarly stored and stuff like that. But the point is, if there is some kind of a security issue and you have a production app, and it has customer records, customer information, and you are storing it in ways where somebody can just get this data, they're going to have access to this data, and Bubble is going to let you know, obviously, or maybe they won't, but you're going to be responsible because you're the custodian of your user's data. You're not, Bubble is not the custodian of your user's data. You are, and so you're going to be responsible. And yes, for the most part, these are professional apps, and they've done their auditing, hopefully. And they know how to correctly store this data, and they weren't launched yesterday, right? These are apps that have been around for quite a while. But the security aspect, not only of the data, basically of the app, is something you have to understand. Whereas if I build my app myself using the tools that are proven, open source tools that have been audited by a community at large, I can be fairly certain that a tool I'm using, maybe a JavaScript framework, maybe a runtime, maybe something else, it's fairly safe. If there's a problem with the tool, the community is going to let me know. And furthermore, I can store the data any way I want, right? For instance, with Firebase Firestore DB, that is a Google tool. So that is not, an internal tool that's used in Bubble. So if I'm using something like FlutterFlow and I'm using an external data storage, like a Firebase Firestore, I can be fairly confident that everything is going to be okay with that, right? Because this is a Google tool. This is, this is not, a tool developed in-house. This is a tool that's used, thousands and millions and tens of millions of people to run their apps. I could be fairly certain with that. But if you're relying on something like Adalo, Thunkable, Bubble, and you're using their internal database, that is something you have to be concerned with, okay? Now, granted, this is a fairly kind of remote possibility that something can go wrong, but still, that is something to keep in mind. That is something important to keep in mind. The next point they should be aware of is a smaller and possibly pricier developer pool. Okay, so if I'm building a Bubble no-code app, or I'm building an Adalo no-code app, and that app is getting more complex, more interesting, I need to hire developers. I need to hire developers to build the app. I also need to hire developers and/or to maintain that app, okay? And so I can go on a site like Appwork and I can find developers. And typically, for a tool like Bubble, for a tool like Adalo, any of these specialized tools, and if they're making a bunch of money, and a lot of these apps, they make a ton of money. The developers, there's going to be a smaller pool of developers as compared to a general purpose, JavaScript developer or a C# developer or, a Flutter, even like a Flutter developer, right? You're going to have a smaller pool. And because there's a smaller pool and demand is fairly the same, fairly equal, fairly similar, they're going to command a higher price. So we have a couple of guys charging $35 an hour, but we also have some guys charging $130 an hour, $250 an hour, depending on where they're from, depending on their experience. And so if you want to get like a really experienced guy, you have to be prepared to pay, right? Because a tool like Bubble, a tool like, Adalo, a tool like even like appgyver, right? These are fairly standard tools that people use to build very, very complex, and a lot of these apps are very, very successful. And so these are fairly standard apps. These are fairly consumer facing apps that you could be using right now and not even be aware that they were built on a platform like Bubble or another no-code platform. And so as a result of how standardized these tools are, you can be sure that there's going to be people that are going to be proficient in these tools, and they're going to command a higher price premium. So like what I'm looking at here, $100 an hour, $38 an hour. Whereas if you're trying to get something like a JavaScript developer, there's going to be a much bigger pool, and you're going to have a lot of choice. You can hire like an entry level, kind of a junior engineer, and that's not going to command as much money as somebody who is a more senior developer. And the way you should be thinking about it is that if you're going to have a successful app, you will have to pay a good amount of money for people to maintain it, to people to look at it, and obviously you want to have experienced people. Whereas if you're building like a JavaScript, or you have like a WordPress site, something like a run-of-the-mill WordPress site or JavaScript, you can go on Fiverr and hire somebody just to fix a bug or do some kind of implementation. And so with these no-code tools, you will have to be looking for experienced people, and there's going to be less of them, and they're going to be commanding a higher price premium. Now, last but not least, I want to talk about the obvious limitations of no-code tools. Now, most likely, these are not going to be limitations that most of you are going to be dealing with, but I personally have dealt with it, and I understand the inherent limitations of some of these tools that we use. So, for instance, with Flutter, it's fairly easy. It's fairly straightforward to do machine learning, AI machine learning. So I can build an app that does image recognition. I can build an app that recognizes certain objects. I can build a face recognition app with Flutter. There are tools, there are libraries when it comes to machine learning and AI that Flutter supports. But with FlutterFlow, I can't really do that just yet because FlutterFlow did not build some of the functionality when it comes to this machine learning. It's almost there, but it's not there yet. And so for the last couple of weeks, I've been trying to build like a machine learning app to show you guys. But I can't do that with FlutterFlow just yet. With Flutter, I can do it. With FlutterFlow, I can't do that just yet. And the same thing applies to some of these other tools. Can you build a machine learning with Adalo? Can you build a machine learning with Bubble? I'm not really sure if you can do it with Bubble. Maybe you can, maybe you can. I know with FlutterFlow, you can't do it just yet. What about authentication? What about me doing like a Google authentication with Adalo, or doing like a third-party Active Directory authentication with Adalo, or doing some kind of a special third-party authentication with Bubble, maybe a Google, maybe a Microsoft-based authentication. I know with FlutterFlow, I can do it with Google. I can do it with Facebook, Twitter, social media tools. I can easily do that. But what about with other tools? There could be limitations. It could be possible to do it. It could be not possible to do it. And so in this point, I'm talking about really, really advanced concepts that are simply not possible or very, very cumbersome to do with no-code tools. And that really goes back to some of the points that I talked about before. That is something you kind of have to understand. So if you want to do like machine learning with like a tool like FlutterFlow, it's going to be fairly difficult. You want to do like image recognition. It's getting there. It's getting there. And in my opinion, FlutterFlow is probably going to be one of the easier tools, one of the more capable tools when it comes to AI, machine learning, because Flutter supports machine learning. So you can already do it with Flutter. You can build a model, and you can train that model, and you can use that model to do, for instance, image recognition, face recognition, stuff like that. You can do it with Flutter, but with FlutterFlow, you can't do it because FlutterFlow does not have all the features of your regular run-of-the-mill Flutter app. So there are some limitations. So as you start building more complex apps, as you start building more interesting, more serious, more feature-packed apps, you're going to be running into situations where you're like, well, I'm not sure if I can do that. Is this even possible? And you're going to go to documentation for these tools, and nobody's going to be talking about it in the documentations, because for the most part, a lot of these documentations, when it comes to these tools, they definitely leave a lot to be desired. Okay, that has been my experience. And so you're going to be trying to figure out, can you do this, can you do that? And so if you're going to be on the bleeding edge of what you're doing, you're going to have situations where you're going to be like, well, I'm not sure if I can do it. You want to build an AI, you want to build an AI app, train the model, take that model with you, and then use that model to build an app to do image recognition or face recognition. That's gonna be on the bleeding edge in a lot of these tools, and in many of these tools you just won't be able to do it. And so that is something to keep in mind. Obviously, the solution to this is that this is only going to concern those of you who are truly at the bleeding edge. And kind of from the comments that I've seen, a lot of people leave. Many of the people are not there just yet, because a lot of you and a lot of us are trying to build relatively simple, useful consumer-facing apps. We're not at that point. But for the 5% of you or the 1% of you who are aiming to go to the bleeding edge and use a no-code tool to do it, that's going to present its own unique challenges. And so that was my main list of the main caveats that I've discovered as a result of using no-code tools for a while now. I'm using all kinds of different tools, talking about them on the channel, doing various videos concerning each of these tools. These are the main caveats. And the reason I'm telling you this is that you internalize it and that you're prepared for some of the issues. And then when you are dealing with a certain issue, whether I've listed today or a different issue altogether, you are going to know exactly what you can do, and you're going to know how to handle that issue without any problems. Now, if you want to take your no-code knowledge to the next level, you're interested in learning FlutterFlow, you're interested in learning other tools, you actually want to build very, very useful apps, check out my Patreon page in the description below. There you can view, clone all the FlutterFlow apps that I've built on this channel, get access to special Q&As, live streams, a lot of extra contents. And so if you're interested in going further in no-code and building serious apps and really, becoming a professional in this field, then you're going to get a lot of value. And it's a fairly great investment for your future no-code knowledge. And so that is all that I have for you guys today. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment below, and I'll talk to you in a future video.